as I was studying for this, I was sitting out in my backyard, and we have a little picnic table out there, which I love. And I was sitting there and just pondering all these things, studying, thinking about them, just meditating on the Word of God. And all of a sudden, I heard this fluttering behind me, like wings. And I turned around, and there was a turkey in my yard. And my yard is fenced. And the turkey was back there. And I'm like, where are my dogs right now? Like, I got 2 labs. You know, if they saw a turkey in the yard, it would not be good. So I see this turkey, and then she walks a little further, and I see all these little chicks around her legs. So cute. They're like the size you could fit in your hand. You know, like you go to Tractor Supply, and they got all the little chicks in there. They're like that. And they're so cute. They're like walking through the grass as it's a maze like this. Like, oh, they're so precious. So I took a video. And as soon as I got done with the video, I noticed that my dog came down into the area that I was. And I'm like, oh boy. And just at that moment, she picks up the scent. She stuck her nose in the air just like this. And I felt the wind hit me from their direction. I'm like, oh, good Lord. And she takes off, and she goes to jump on this turkey. And just as she went to jump, the turkey jumped and went, "Brrr!" Started flapping its wings, and squawking and doing all kinds of things. And then it took off, and it ran across the yard from one end. We're on one side of the yard. It ran across the whole other side of the yard, and it jumped the fence, and I'm yelling, and the dogs are barking, the turkey's squawking, and this thing finally gets outside, and now both dogs are over there, and they're barking, and I'm still yelling at them, and they're not, I mean, they're bred to do this. This is what they do. They're not listening to me anymore. So they're over there, both their faces are through the fence, barking at this turkey, and she's still over there squawking. And I'm like, wow, isn't this fascinating? And so I finally round them up, and I put them in the house, and then I go over to look at where the event took place, where my dog almost jumped on this thing, to see if there's any chicks that might have been hurt in the process of this. And so I'm weaving through the grass, and I don't see anything, and I'm like, okay, well, my experience told me it's best just to back away and leave it, and she'll come back for him. So sure enough, I go and sit down at the picnic table, and she finally stops squawking out there, and she comes around, and she jumps the fence, and she goes back to where that all happened, and she starts clucking, and she's pacing back and forth, going, boop, 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 boop. And I was like, poor thing, like, how did this even happen, you know? And so I'm sitting there for a little while, and she's pacing back and forth. And then finally, she hops the fence, and she starts walking down, and I see all her little chicks around her again. And so I'm comparing the video that I took. I'm like trying to count all the chicks and count how many she had. I'm like, are there any missing here? You know, like. I think all of them were there. Anyway, she walks off and walks out, and I never saw her again. But you know, what struck me so much is what she did for her chicks. Because you understand that this was not just an accident. This wasn't random. It wasn't a show. What she did on purpose. All the flapping and squawking and running around like crazy was to distract the predators from her little babies. And so when she ran across the yard, and even though she was outside the fence, she's still squawking out there, keeping the attention of the dogs. She's doing it for a purpose. And then as soon as the coast is clear, she comes back and gathers up her chicks. You see, what she did is she sacrificed herself in order that her children, her little chicks, could survive. She was willing to give up everything that her children would survive. all these movements that we've had in the last 60 years in this country that have led to the breakdown of the family, to the breakdown of marriage, to the breakdown of parenthood, to all these things, are what's keeping us from doing what God originally called us to do. God calls us to live sacrificially for our families, to live for raising up the next generation, instead of all the things that we live our lives, the chasing after the world, the trying to be famous on Facebook, all these things. This turkey was willing to give up her life for her chicks. Some parents aren't even willing to give up their phone for their kids. It's a sacrificial love that God calls us to.